Olive Oatman, a name that resonates through time, is forever linked to a tale of unimaginable pain, loss, and resilience. She was not just a survivor, but a woman whose story captivates even today. Her striking beauty was made even more distinctive by the tattoo that adorned her chin, a mark that told of her extraordinary journey through tragedy, captivity, and survival. In this video, we travel through time to relive the harrowing experiences of Olive Oatman, a story that begins in the quiet town of La Harpe, Illinois, where Olive was born on September 7, 1837. Her parents, Royce and Mary Ann Oatman, were deeply religious, their lives guided by the principles of the Mormon faith. Olive was one of 7 children, part of a large family shaped by their devotion to their faith and their dreams of a better life. Royce Oatman, a farmer and a man whose beliefs were deeply entwined with the teachings of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Latter-day Saint movement, became the driving force behind the family's decision to embark on a dangerous journey to the West. This westward expansion, during the early 1850s, was fueled by religious aspirations and the tantalizing promise of new opportunities in the unexplored territories of the West. The family hoped to join a growing Mormon settlement in Utah, where they could build a new life far from the struggles they faced in Illinois. But the path ahead was fraught with peril, and the risks of such a journey would soon reveal themselves in ways they could never have imagined. The Oatman family joined a wagon train heading west, part of the Great Migration that characterized the mid-19th century. Together with other families seeking a fresh start, they set out across the unforgiving American frontier. The landscape they encountered was vast, desolate, and harsh, a mix of scorching deserts, towering mountain ranges, and stretches of wilderness that seemed endless. The travelers faced relentless heat by day, frigid cold at night, and the ever-present threat of sudden, violent storms that could turn their precarious journey into a living nightmare. Food and water were precious commodities, and as the journey dragged on, supplies dwindled. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion became their constant companions. The physical toll of the journey was immense, but the mental strain was even greater. Fear and uncertainty lurked at every turn, and tempers within the group began to fray. Tensions among the travelers eventually came to a head. The Oatman family found themselves at odds with James Brewster, one of the wagon train's leaders, over the best route to take. Brewster insisted on taking a northern route, while Royce Oatman, believing in his own instincts and a desire to avoid conflict, chose to lead his family down the southern path. It was a decision that would have fatal consequences. The Oatmans, now traveling alone, pressed forward into a treacherous and largely unknown region. As they neared the border of modern-day Arizona and California, they arrived at a place called Maricopa Wells, where they received a dire warning. Locals advised Royce Oatman not to proceed further, cautioning him about hostile Native American tribes that fiercely guarded their territory. But Royce, ever determined, ignored these warnings. The Oatmans continued on, unaware that they were heading straight into a deadly encounter. As the family journeyed deeper into the unforgiving terrain, they came face to face with the Yavapai, a tribe that had long inhabited the region. The Yavapai initially approached the Oatman family under the guise of friendship, asking for food and tobacco, their demeanor seemingly peaceful. But the atmosphere soon shifted. The requests turned to demands, and before anyone could react, the Yavapai launched a brutal attack. The attack was swift, violent, and devastating. Royce Oatman, his wife Mary Ann, and 4 of their children were slaughtered in the blink of an eye. Olive, then only 14 years old, watched in horror as her family was torn apart. The only survivors were Olive, her younger sister Mary Ann, and their brother Lorenzo, who was left for dead after being severely beaten. Lorenzo's survival was nothing short of a miracle. Bloodied and barely clinging to life, he somehow managed to make his way to a nearby settlement where he was taken in and nursed back to health by sympathetic settlers. For a long time, Lorenzo believed that his sisters had also perished in the attack. But even after learning of their possible survival, he would spend the rest of his life searching for them, determined to reunite with the only family he had left. Meanwhile, Olive and Mary Ann had been taken captive by the Yavapai. The trauma of witnessing the massacre of their family weighed heavily on the 2 girls, and their fate was uncertain. They were forced to march to the Yavapai village, a grueling journey through the harsh desert landscape that left them physically and emotionally drained. Upon arriving at the village, Olive and her sister were thrust into a new, terrifying reality. The Yavapai, though brutal in their capture, did not kill the girls. Instead, they were kept as prisoners, valued for their potential usefulness. In the eyes of their captors, Olive and Mary Ann could serve as laborers, performing the difficult and menial tasks that were part of daily life in the village. For months, Olive and Mary Ann endured this new existence. They were made to work long hours under the hot sun, fetching water, gathering firewood, and doing other grueling tasks. They were kept under constant watch, their every move monitored by the Yavapai. Communication was nearly impossible, as the sisters did not understand the language or customs of the tribe. They were isolated, cut off from everything they had known, and forced to adapt to a way of life that was completely foreign to them. The Yavapai made no effort to teach them their language, leaving Olive and Mary Ann to struggle in silence. Food was scarce, and the sisters often went hungry, their clothing gradually falling apart, offering little protection against the elements. It was a life of hardship, fear, and uncertainty. Yet, despite the overwhelming challenges they faced, Olive and Mary Ann clung to each other for strength. Their bond became a lifeline in an otherwise bleak and terrifying world. But fate had not yet abandoned Olive Oatman. After enduring months of captivity, a glimmer of hope appeared in the form of the Mojave people. The Mojave, who occasionally traded with the Yavapai, visited the village one day and encountered the two young captives. Among the Mojave was Topeka, the chief's daughter, who was moved by the plight of Olive and Mary Ann. Seeing the cruelty with which the girls were treated, Topeka resolved to intervene. She negotiated with the Yavapai for their release, offering 2 horses, blankets, and beads in exchange for the captives. The Yavapai, perhaps sensing an opportunity to profit, agreed to the trade, and Olive and Mary Ann were freed from their brutal captors. The journey to the Mojave village was long, but the sisters' lives changed dramatically once they arrived. The Mojave welcomed them with open arms, treating them with kindness and respect. They were taken in by the chief's family and integrated into the tribe's way of life. The Mojave provided them with food, clothing, and shelter, and for the first time since the attack, Olive and Mary Ann felt a sense of safety. Life with the Mojave was far different from their experience with the Yavapai. They were no longer treated as slaves, but rather as part of the community. The sisters were given tattoos on their chins, a traditional practice among the Mojave, signifying their new status within the tribe. Olive, in particular, thrived in her new environment. Over time, she learned the Mojave language and customs, becoming fully immersed in their culture. She developed a close bond with Topeka and the rest of the Mojave people, who had shown her more compassion than she had ever expected to find. Mary Ann, however, struggled with her health and eventually succumbed to illness, leaving Olive to face the world alone once more. Despite the heartache of losing her sister, Olive remained with the Mojave for several more years, growing into adulthood under their care. Eventually, word of a white girl living among the Mojave reached nearby settlements, and negotiations began for her return. In 1856, after much persuasion and with the promise of gifts for the Mojave, Olive was released. Her return to the world of white settlers was met with great interest, and her story quickly became the stuff of legend. She was regarded as a symbol of endurance and survival, her tattooed face a permanent reminder of the extraordinary life she had led. But Olive's return to society was bittersweet. Though she was celebrated as a survivor, she struggled to reconcile the life she had once known with the one she had lived among the Mojave. She became a speaker, sharing her story with captivated audiences, but the trauma of her past remained with her. Her tale is one of transformation, of a young girl thrust into unimaginable circumstances, forced to adapt, survive, and ultimately find her way back to a world that had changed as much as she had. The story of Olive Oatman is not just about survival, it's about resilience, identity, and the complex relationships between different cultures during the tumultuous period in American history. Olive Oatman's life, marked by extraordinary events and shaped by experiences few could fathom, took a dramatic turn when she became part of the Mojave community. The Mojave tribe lived along the fertile banks of the Colorado River, in what is now the borderland between Arizona and California. Their culture and lifestyle were a world apart from what Olive and her younger sister Mary Ann had known in their early life. The Mojave's subsistence revolved around farming, hunting, and fishing, and their survival in the semi-arid region demanded resilience and adaptation. This new environment was challenging for the Oatman sisters, but it also offered them a level of stability and safety that had been absent since their family's brutal massacre. After being traded from the Yavapai to the Mojave, Olive and Mary Ann were taken in by a Mojave family, headed by a woman named Españo and her husband. This adoption into the family fundamentally changed the conditions of their captivity. The Mojave provided the sisters with food, clothing, and protection, integrating them into the rhythms of daily life. In time, Olive and Mary Ann were given traditional Mojave tattoos on their chins, a symbol of their acceptance into the tribe. These tattoos, which would become iconic symbols of Olive's life, were not marks of slavery but rather signifiers of belonging. According to Mojave customs, the tattoos were believed to hold spiritual significance, acting as identifiers in the afterlife when they would meet their ancestors. For Olive, the tattoos were a visible representation of her transformation and the profound change in her life. Olive's integration into the Mojave community offered her a degree of security and peace. Unlike their previous captors, the Yavapai, the Mojave treated Olive and Mary Ann with kindness and respect. The sisters took part in the community's agricultural activities, helping to plant and harvest crops in the harsh desert environment. Their clothing changed as well. They exchanged the worn garments they had arrived in for traditional Mojave attire, woven skirts made from natural fibers. As they learned the Mojave language and participated in the community's spiritual rituals, which were centered on animistic beliefs and the worship of nature, Olive and Mary Ann became more deeply entwined with their new life. Despite the outward appearance of contentment, Olive's inner struggle was far more complex. Anthropologist Alfred L. Kroeber later noted that the Mojave had never forced Olive to stay. In fact, she was free to leave at any time, but she remained with the tribe. Some speculate that Olive hesitated to return to white society because of a lack of direction or fear of retribution. But others believe her reasons were more profound. Her reluctance to leave was likely tied to the bonds she had formed and the life she had built within the Mojave community. When white railroad surveyors visited the Mojave Valley, Olive chose not to reveal her identity. For an entire week, she interacted with them without disclosing who she was, a testament to her deep connection to the Mojave people. However, life among the Mojave was not without its difficulties. In the mid-1850s, a devastating drought struck the region, leading to severe food shortages that tested the community's endurance. The scarcity of food hit the Oatman sisters especially hard. Olive's younger sister, Mary Ann, became gravely ill, weakened by hunger and malnutrition. Despite Olive's desperate attempts to care for her sister, Mary Ann succumbed to starvation. The loss of her sister was a crushing blow for Olive, a heart-wrenching reminder of the fragility of life in such an unforgiving environment. According to Mojave tradition, the dead were typically cremated, but in a show of respect for Olive, the chief's wife allowed her to decide how to handle Mary Ann's remains, offering support during one of the most difficult times of her life. By the time Olive was 19, she had fully embraced her life with the Mojave. She had spent 5 years with the tribe, forming deep bonds and becoming an integral part of their society. Yet, her identity as a white woman remained a potential point of conflict. As rumors of a white girl living among the Mojave began to circulate among settlers and soldiers at nearby Fort Yuma, Olive's world was once again set to change. News of her existence reached the fort, prompting the military authorities to send Francisco, a Yuma Indian, to the Mojave village to negotiate her release. Francisco arrived with a letter from the fort and trade goods to offer in exchange for Olive's freedom. At first, the Mojave were hesitant to release Olive. After all, she had become a valued member of their community, and they did not want to lose her. Olive herself had developed close relationships with many in the tribe, and the thought of leaving her Mojave family behind was undoubtedly painful. However, under the pressure of negotiations and the desire to maintain peaceful relations with the Yuma and the U.S. government, the Mojave leaders eventually agreed to let Olive go. The fear of potential military action from Fort Yuma may have played a role in their decision as well. Olive's departure from the Mojave was filled with emotion. After a grueling 20-day journey back to Fort Yuma, Olive arrived at the fort, accompanied by Topeka, the Mojave woman who had played a key role in her rescue. As she entered the fort, Olive was greeted with cheers and celebrations, but her emotions were undoubtedly conflicted. She had left behind a life that had become familiar, a family that had cared for her, and a community where she had found a place of belonging. The joy of her return was tempered by the sadness of what she had lost. The transition back into white society was far from easy. Olive had spent half a decade living among the Mojave, and during that time, she had become fully immersed in their way of life. Upon her return to Fort Yuma, she faced the daunting task of relearning English, readapting to the customs and norms of American society, and coming to terms with the trauma she had endured. The brutal murder of her family, her years of captivity, and the loss of her sister weighed heavily on her mind. The tattoos on her chin, once a symbol of acceptance in the Mojave tribe, became a visible reminder of her past, something that set her apart from the rest of society. Despite these challenges, Olive showed remarkable strength and resilience. She was taken in by a foster family and gradually reintegrated into society. Though she struggled to reconcile her dual identity as both a former captive and a member of the white world, her story captivated the nation, and Olive became a symbol of survival and endurance. She was reunited with her brother Lorenzo, who had never stopped searching for her, and together, they tried to rebuild their lives. But the public's fascination with Olive's story brought its own set of difficulties. Rumors and speculation about Olive's time with the Mojave swirled in the years following her release. Some, like her close friend Susan Thompson, claimed that Olive had left behind more than just a life with the Mojave. Susan alleged that Olive had married a Mojave man and had given birth to 2 sons during her time with the tribe. Though Olive herself never publicly confirmed these rumors, the question of whether Olive had formed romantic ties with a Mojave man became a point of contention, and she spent much of her later life denying these claims. Whatever the truth of her personal relationships, Olive's story continued to capture the imagination of the American public. She became a sought-after speaker, sharing her experiences with audiences across the country. Yet, the attention she received was often sensationalized, with newspapers and magazines embellishing the details of her life to suit the public's appetite for drama and intrigue. In the end, Olive Oatman's story is one of survival against overwhelming odds. She faced unimaginable hardship, from the slaughter of her family to years of captivity, the loss of her sister, and the struggle to find her place in a world that had changed forever. Her resilience, her ability to adapt, and her determination to carry on are a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Though she lived in the shadow of her past, Olive Oatman's legacy endures as a reminder of the complexity of identity, the bonds of family and community, and the transformative power of survival. Olive Oatman, with her remarkable and haunting past, left a deep imprint on American history. Her unique appearance, particularly the striking Mojave tattoos on her chin, along with the dramatic nature of her experiences, captivated the public's imagination. Newspapers and magazines published sensationalized accounts of her captivity and release, often distorting facts to make her story even more compelling. This attention catapulted Olive into the limelight, making her story one of the most talked about narratives of her time. Royal B. Stratton's book Life Among the Indians published in 1857, played a significant role in immortalizing Olive's tale. Based on her experiences, Stratton's book was a sensationalized bestseller, portraying Olive as a tragic heroine. It emphasized her suffering, resilience, and survival. However, the version of events in Stratton's account often strayed far from the truth. While the book painted Olive's life with the Mojave as one of continuous captivity, depicting the Mojave people as cruel and oppressive captors, the reality was far more nuanced. Olive's real-life experiences with the Mojave were far from the dramatic and exaggerated portrayals that gripped the American public. Stratton's book claimed that Olive and her sister Mary Ann had been forcibly held by the Mojave, emphasizing their captivity and suffering. However, historical evidence suggests that Olive's relationship with the Mojave people was more complex than mere enslavement. In reality, Olive had become an accepted member of the Mojave community, and her famous facial tattoos were not forced upon her as symbols of enslavement. Instead, these tattoos signified her adoption into the tribe and were part of the Mojave's spiritual and cultural practices. According to Mojave tradition, these tattoos served an important purpose in the afterlife, allowing the deceased to be recognized by their ancestors. Yet, Stratton's book distorted this aspect of her story, portraying the tattoos as a mark of her enslavement and disfigurement, further reinforcing negative stereotypes of Native Americans. Despite the inaccuracies and exaggerations, Stratton's book sold more than 30,000 copies, bringing fame and financial benefits to Olive and her brother Lorenzo. The money earned from the book allowed Olive and Lorenzo to attend university, forever altering their lives. But as the public became more fascinated with her story, Olive herself was drawn into a web of misrepresentation. She began to play along with these dramatized versions of her life, perpetuating the portrayal of the Mojave as her cruel captors and describing her facial tattoos as symbols of her enslavement. As her story of survival gained traction, Olive was encouraged to lecture across the country, often alongside her brother Lorenzo. These public talks, given to large crowds eager to hear first-hand accounts of her experiences with the Yavapai and Mojave, reinforced the narrative that had already taken hold. The public's fascination with Olive's story had its benefits, but it also carried significant drawbacks. While the book and the lectures provided financial stability for Olive and her family, they also contributed to widespread misconceptions about Native Americans, particularly the Mojave. Olive's story, as presented in Stratton's book, reinforced harmful stereotypes of Native peoples as brutal and uncivilized, overshadowing the true nature of her relationship with the Mojave. It serves as a reminder of how historical storytelling can sometimes prioritize drama over truth, shaping how people and events are remembered. Olive Oatman holds a unique place in history, not only as one of the first white women to bear the mark of a Native American tribe through her tattoos, but also as one of the earliest American female public speakers. Her lectures, although steeped in sensationalism, made her an unwitting participant in the early feminist movement, as women speaking publicly was still a rarity at the time. Yet, the burden of recounting her traumatic story took a heavy toll on Olive. While Lorenzo eventually stopped sharing his side of their ordeal, Olive continued to lecture for nearly 6 years, often reliving the painful memories of her captivity and loss. In 1865, Olive married John Fairchild, a wealthy cattleman from Texas. This marriage provided Olive with the stability and security she had longed for since the massacre of her family. She and John settled in Sherman, Texas, where they lived a quiet, prosperous life in a large Victorian mansion. Before starting this new chapter of her life, Olive made a decisive break from her past. John Fairchild, disapproving of Stratton's exploitation of Olive's story for financial gain, went as far as burning copies of Stratton's book and cutting ties with him altogether. Stratton, who had taken advantage of Olive's need for money, was not invited to Olive and John's wedding. Despite her efforts to distance herself from her past, Olive's trauma never fully faded. She became withdrawn, rarely speaking about her years with the Mojave, and often wore a veil to hide her distinctive facial tattoos. The emotional wounds from the massacre of her family, the loss of her sister Mary Ann, and her years of captivity left her deeply scarred. Olive struggled with depression throughout her life, experiencing episodes of emotional distress that led to a nervous breakdown. She sought various treatments, including a visit to a medical spa in Canada, but nothing could fully heal the deep psychological scars she carried. In response to her emotional struggles, Olive turned to charity work, particularly with orphans. Her involvement in this work was likely a reflection of her own feelings of loss and displacement. By helping those who had also suffered, Olive found a way to channel her pain into something positive. Despite her philanthropic efforts, Olive remained a deeply private and reserved individual. She rarely spoke about her past, and her facial tattoos became a permanent reminder of her earlier life, even as she tried to leave it behind. Olive's life with John Fairchild and their adopted daughter, Mary Elizabeth, was relatively peaceful and prosperous. She provided Mary with the stable and nurturing childhood she herself had been denied, ensuring that her daughter did not experience the same hardships she had endured. Yet, despite this semblance of a peaceful life, rumors and speculation about Olive's past continued to follow her. One persistent rumor falsely claimed that Olive spent her final days in a mental asylum. In reality, it was her former collaborator, Royal B. Stratton, who suffered from hereditary insanity and spent time institutionalized, not Olive. The death of her brother Lorenzo in 1901 dealt Olive a heavy blow. Lorenzo had been her only surviving family member after the Yavapai attack that wiped out their parents and siblings. The bond between Olive and Lorenzo had been strong, and his death left her feeling more isolated than ever. Without him, Olive lost a crucial connection to her past, further compounding her emotional struggles. After Lorenzo's death, Olive's health began to deteriorate. The cumulative effects of her lifelong emotional turmoil and recent grief became evident. And she suffered from declining physical and psychological health. Despite living in a supportive environment with her husband and adopted daughter, the weight of her traumatic past never fully lifted. In March 1903, Olive Oatman died from a heart attack, quietly passing away in Sherman, Texas. Her death marked the end of a life that had been filled with extraordinary hardship, resilience, and survival. Olive Oatman's legacy, however, lived on. In the years following her death, many books, articles, and studies were written about her life. Historians and scholars have attempted to separate fact from fiction, clarifying what really happened to Olive during her years with the Mojave and placing her story within the broader context of American history. Olive's life offers a window into the complex relationships between Native Americans and European settlers, the challenges faced by frontier families, and the enduring human capacity to overcome trauma and adversity. Her story continues to be remembered, analyzed, and discussed, providing valuable insights into the struggles and triumphs of a remarkable woman whose life defied the expectations of her time. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to support our channel by giving this video a like and subscribing for more fascinating historical content. Thank you for watching.